Picture this. You are standing in a liquor store aisle staring at 40 bottles of bourbon, and every single one of them is lying to your face. The labels scream heritage. The bottles feel heavy in your hand. The price tags whisper that you are making a sophisticated choice. But behind the glass and the gold lettering, half of these bottles contain liquid that costs less to produce than the cardboard box it shipped in. Tonight, we are pulling back the curtain on 5 bourbon brands charging premium prices for mediocre whiskey. Then we are handing you 5 bottles that quietly outperform all of them for a fraction of the cost. The number one pick on this list might be the single best $25 you spend on whiskey this entire year. But first, the brands that have been picking your pocket. There is a bottle sitting in craft spirits sections across America that charges you nearly $100 per liter for bourbon younger than most cheese. Hudson Baby Bourbon arrived in 2006 from Tut Hill Town Spirits in New York, one of the first craft distilleries on the East Coast to capture national attention. In 2010, William Grant and Sons wrote a $12 million check to acquire the brand. That was the moment the math stopped making sense. The bottle holds 375 milliliters, not 750, 375. Half a standard bottle, yet it sells for $40 to $50. Pull out a calculator, and you are looking at $80 to $100 per liter for bourbon aged less than 4 years. Pour it, and the youth screams at you. Raw corn sweetness collides with grain alcohol heat. There is a flash of caramel that vanishes before you can enjoy it, and a finish that feels like it left the party before the music started. New York corn in the mash bill sounds romantic on a label. In the glass, it tastes like a distillery that ran out of patience before the barrels ran out of time. Hudson Baby deserves credit for opening doors in craft bourbon. But credit does not justify charging sports car prices for a bicycle. Somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean right now, a barrel of bourbon is rocking back and forth on a cargo ship, and someone is going to pay $90 for that voyage. Jefferson's Ocean launched in 2012 with a premise so cinematic, it practically wrote its own ad campaign. Bourbon barrels cross the equator on ocean vessels, exposed to salt air, temperature swings, and constant rocking. The brand calls it maturation through motion. Critics call it a very expensive boat ride. Founder Trey Zoller built Jefferson's in 1997 as a sourcing operation, buying whiskey from established distilleries and finishing it with creative twists. The Ocean line was the twist that captured imaginations and wallets. At $60 to $90 per bottle, you are paying a premium that would make a cruise ship blush. The liquid itself tastes like bourbon, standard caramel sweetness, a faint briny quality that might be ocean influence or might be the power of suggestion after reading the back label. Independent blind tastings routinely struggle to separate Jefferson's Ocean from landlocked bourbons at half the price. Science has a word for processes that sound impressive, but produce no measurable difference: placebo. When your bourbon needs a passport to justify its price tag, the problem is not the destination. It is the liquid that never left home. Jim Beam figured out something clever in 1992. If you dilute bourbon to the absolute legal minimum, you can stretch the same barrels across more bottles. Then you wrap those bottles in tall, slender glass with a metal band and a dignified label, and suddenly 80 proof whiskey becomes a $40 to $50 sophistication statement. Basil Hayden's is the result of that calculation. At 80 proof, this bourbon sits at the exact floor the law allows. 1 degree lower, and it cannot legally call itself bourbon. Think about that for a moment. A premium-priced product engineered to contain the minimum amount of alcohol the category permits. The tasting experience matches the math. light caramel, soft rice spice, a whisper of vanilla, then nothing. The finish evaporates like morning fog burning off a parking lot. There is no complexity waiting underneath, no hidden layers revealing themselves on the second sip, just pleasant warmth that disappears before you can register disappointment. Beam designed this bourbon to convert wine drinkers and whiskey beginners. Restaurants adopted it because it never challenges anyone. Bars stock it because nobody sends it back. But at $50, you are not paying for craftsmanship. You are paying for restraint you never asked for. Imagine walking into a steakhouse, ordering the premium cut, and receiving a filet sliced so thin you can read the menu through it. Technically, it is still filet. Technically, Basil Hayden's is still bourbon. But in both cases, someone took what should have been substantial and made it forgettable on purpose. This one hurts, because Angel's Envy started as something genuinely special. Lincoln Henderson spent decades as master distiller at Brown-Forman, shaping some of Kentucky's most respected whiskey. When he launched Angel's Envy in 2011, it carried the weight of a craftsman finally building something for himself. Port wine barrel finishing was the signature move. Dried fruit, maple sweetness, and subtle wine tannins layered on top of a solid bourbon base. Early batches felt personal. You could taste the intention behind every decision. Then Bacardi arrived with $150 million in 2015, and intentions gave way to infrastructure. Production scaled to meet nationwide distribution. What once trickled out of Louisville in small batches now fills shelves in every state. The bourbon at $50 to $60 is still pleasant. Nobody argues that, but pleasant is not what Lincoln Henderson built his legacy on. The curved bottle and heavy glass still signal craft. The liquid inside increasingly signals volume. It is like watching your favorite local restaurant get bought by a chain. The menu looks the same. The sign still hangs over the door. But the chef who made it special is gone, and the corporate kitchen behind the scenes follows a recipe designed for consistency, not soul. Henderson passed away in 2013, just 2 years after launch. His bourbon now belongs to a conglomerate worth billions. The port finish remains, the vision that created it does not. If you design a bourbon to win Instagram before it wins a tasting competition, you get Bulleit. That frontier aesthetic is no accident. The rugged bottle with the slanted label and burnt orange glow was engineered to photograph beautifully on bar carts and in cocktail flat lays. It screams small batch authenticity. The company writing the checks is Diageo. The same global conglomerate behind Johnnie Walker, Smirnoff, and a spirits portfolio worth over $80 billion. There is nothing small batch about it. At $30 to $35, Bulleit costs more than its flavor justifies. The high rye mash bill delivers lively pepper and orange zest on the nose. But the mid-palate narrows fast, and the oak turns bitter in a way that better bourbons at this price never allow. Tom Bulleit founded the brand in 1987. Seagram's acquired it. Diageo inherited it. Now the marketing team that sells vodka by the tanker load and scotch by the shipping container also decides how this bourbon reaches your glass. The leather imagery and frontier mythology sell rebellion and independence. The corporate structure behind it sells margin optimization and shelf space contracts. Run a blind tasting with Bulleit and any 2 value picks from this list, and watch the costume fall apart in real time. Without the bottle, this bourbon cannot hide behind its outfit. Every dollar of that $35 price tag that funds brand photography instead of barrel aging is a dollar stolen from your glass. 5 bourbons, 5 marketing machines designed to separate you from your money through packaging, gimmicks, and proof so low it barely qualifies. But here is what the industry does not want you to know. The best bourbon in America is not hiding behind allocated releases or premium price tags. It is sitting on bottom shelves in plain sight, waiting for drinkers smart enough to look down instead of up. If that is the kind of information you want every week, subscribe now. Because what comes next are the bottles that make those overpriced pretenders look like the embarrassment they are. Walk into any liquor store in Kentucky and find the bottle that locals actually drink when nobody is watching them. Evan Williams' Black Label sits on the lowest shelf wearing a label so understated it practically apologizes for existing. At $12 to $15, most shoppers walk right past it. Their loss. This Heaven Hill workhorse delivers bourbon character that has no business existing at this price point. The nose brings caramel and baking spice that suggest something costing 3 times as much. On the palate, brown sugar sweetness meets toasted wood and a peppery warmth that lingers well past what budget bourbon typically manages. Named after Kentucky's first commercial distiller who established his operation in 1783, Evan Williams carries more legitimate heritage than brands charging 4 times its price. Yet the bottle never mentions it in gold foil or embossed lettering. Remember that name, Heaven Hill, because this is not the last time their distillery appears on our list. And when you realize the same operation producing this $12 miracle also crafts one of the most respected small batch bourbons in America, the overpriced brands start looking even more absurd. Bartenders who have poured thousands of glasses will tell you the same thing off the record. When a customer asks for a good bourbon and does not specify a brand, Evan Williams is the bottle that comes off the speed rail more often than any premium label. Not because it is cheap, because it is good. Home bar builders stock it knowing it performs in cocktails and sips respectably neat without requiring an apology. There are no celebrity endorsements, no allocated releases, no artificial scarcity driving up demand. Just bourbon that costs less than 2 fast food meals and outdrinks bottles requiring a week's grocery budget. Evan Williams proves that value and quality live at the same address. They just never hired a marketing department to put up a fancy sign. In 1870, George Garvin Brown did something radical. He sold bourbon exclusively in sealed glass bottles, when the rest of the industry poured from open barrels where anyone could water down or adulterate the product. That commitment to honesty defined Old Forester from its first day. 150 years later, the philosophy has not changed. At $22 to $28, the 100 proof expression delivers a full-bodied bourbon that embarrasses competitors at twice its price. The first sip opens with brown sugar and banana bread richness that coats the palate. Toasted oak anchors the middle, while baking spice keeps everything dynamic and interesting. The finish lingers with patient warmth that rewards the drinker who sits with it, instead of rushing to the next sip. 100 proof is not a gimmick here, it is a guarantee. Enough weight to stand up to ice without dissolving into flavored water. Enough backbone for an old-fashioned that actually tastes like bourbon instead of simple syrup. Enough presence neat to make you forget you only paid $25. Bartenders across Louisville will tell you this is their go-to pour for old fashions and Manhattans, precisely because it performs like a bottle that costs $50 without flinching. While other distilleries chase limited releases and influencer partnerships, Old Forester simply stocks shelves at reasonable prices and trusts drinkers to notice. In an industry addicted to hype, that kind of quiet honesty is almost rebellious. Here is where Heaven Hill shows up again. The same distillery producing that $12 Evan Williams also crafts Elijah Craig small batch, and at $28 to $35, it delivers complexity that allocated bourbons promise and routinely fail to match. The nose opens warm with caramel, toasted oak, and a brightness like orange zest that lifts everything around it. The palate brings vanilla and baking spice layered with gentle smoke, a combination that feels richer and more considered than the price allows. The finish balances sweetness against warmth in a proportion that more expensive bottles spend years trying to achieve, and rarely do. Named after the Baptist minister historically credited with first aging bourbon in charred oak barrels, Elijah Craig carries foundational weight in the category. The 12-year age statement disappeared in 2016. a move that worried loyalists. But Heaven Hill managed their barrel inventory with enough skill that quality barely wavered. This is the bourbon bartenders quietly recommend when a customer says they want something premium without the premium regret. It works for contemplative sipping on a slow evening. It works in cocktails where the bourbon needs to lead without shouting. One distillery, 2 entries on this list. Heaven Hill could charge double for both, and most drinkers would still call it fair. Instead, they price their bourbon like people who actually drink bourbon set the numbers. That single fact tells you everything about which brands respect their customers and which ones exploit them. There is a man named Jimmy Russell who has been walking the rickhouses at Wild Turkey since 1954. 7 decades, 1 distillery, 1 unwavering commitment to making bourbon that tastes exactly like bourbon is supposed to taste. Wild Turkey 101 is his legacy in liquid form, and at $20 to $25, it makes every overpriced bottle on this list look like a punchline. 101 proof, printed on the label, like a badge of honor. This is not bourbon designed for people who want something gentle. This is bourbon designed for people who want something real. The first sip arrives with confidence. Cherry and cinnamon hit up front with authority. Rich caramel fills the middle, with a warmth that feels earned, not engineered by a focus group. Oak and genuine spice close the finish with a bite that never crosses into harshness. That balance is the magic. 101 punches well above its weight without ever losing composure, like a heavyweight who moves with the precision of a welterweight. Pour it neat, and complexity rewards your patience. Build an old-fashioned and watch it stand its ground against any ingredient you throw at it. Mix a Manhattan and taste what real backbone means in a cocktail glass. Jimmy Russell could have chased trends, could have released limited editions behind velvet ropes and lottery systems, could have tripled the price and let social media do the selling. Instead, he kept making the same honest bourbon at the same honest price for 7 decades and trusted that real drinkers would find it. They did. And they keep coming back, generation after generation. Old school drinkers love it because it never sold out or went soft to chase a wider audience. New drinkers discover it and realize in a single glass what bourbon is actually supposed to taste like at every price point. This is a bourbon that could charge double tomorrow and still justify every cent. Instead, it sits on accessible shelves at accessible prices, waiting for drinkers smart enough to recognize value when they see it. At $25, Wild Turkey 101 does not just compete with $50 bourbon. It makes you question why $50 bourbon exists at all. This is the bottle that sits on the shelf and quietly asks one question: how much of your money are you willing to hand to a marketing department? The bourbon industry spends billions every year, convincing you that price equals quality. A heavier bottle does not mean a better liquid. A boat ride, a port barrel, or a frontier label does not add something meaningful to the whiskey inside. It does not. The best bourbon in America has never needed permission from a marketing team or validation from a price tag. It just needed time and good oak, and a distiller who refused to cut corners. 5 overpriced bottles taught us the same lesson from 5 different angles. The money goes to everything except what ends up in your glass. 5 value bottles prove the opposite is still possible in this industry. Next time you stand in that aisle surrounded by bottles fighting for your attention, look past the packaging. Ignore the shelf talkers. Forget what Instagram told you was worth buying. Pick up the bottle that spent its budget on what is inside instead of what is outside. Your palate will thank you. Your wallet already does.